This girl from a nobody family dared to go after our money. It's a joke. For 3 years of marriage, Sarah had lived with her husband's parents, worked as a freelance translator, and even contributed her share to the household budget. But her mother-in-law never once accepted her. That day, $300,000 vanished from the mother-in-law's savings account without a shred of evidence. She grabbed her 7 months pregnant daughter-in-law by the hair. On a frigid December night, she was thrown into the apartment hallway wearing only slippers. Her husband didn't open the door, and one by one, the lights in their apartment went out. She shivered alone on the cold concrete floor. Then, the building's security guard handed her an old cell phone. With a trembling hand, she dialed a number. Dad. Her husband's family had no idea what kind of storm that one phone call would unleash. They had no clue who their daughter-in-law's father really was. So, what happened to that family after that night? It was one of those early December days. A biting winter wind howled through the residential complex on the outskirts of New York City. Sarah, 7 months pregnant, sat in her small room, her heavy body making every movement an effort. The laptop screen was filled with a dense Spanish text that needed to be translated. The deadline for the publisher was in 2 days, so Sarah's fingers flew tirelessly across the keyboard. Every time the baby kicked, Sarah would pause for a moment and gently rub her belly. Just a little longer, sweetie. Mommy will finish this and then we'll rest, she'd murmur to herself. She had been a freelance translator for over 5 years. Fluent in Spanish and Japanese, she always had work, earning between $5,000 and $7,000 a month. Living with her in-laws, she contributed to household expenses and was already buying everything needed for the baby. Sarah took pride in the fact that she earned her own way, never asking anyone for help. Just then, the door to her room burst open. Her mother-in-law, Margaret Thompson, stood there with a sour expression. Sarah flinched and pulled her hands away from the laptop. Mom, is something wrong? What are you always doing, holed up in your little den? You think if you just stare at that computer, dinner will cook itself? Margaret's voice was sharp with irritation. Sighing inwardly, Sarah replied, The translation is due the day after tomorrow. I'm almost done. Translation, schmanslation. How much can you possibly make from that? Besides, it's not healthy for a pregnant woman to sit in front of a computer all day. It's bad for the baby. With that grumble, Margaret slammed the door and left. Sarah's shoulders slumped. Her mother-in-law was always like this. She looked down on Sarah's work, yet she accepted the money Sarah contributed to the household as if it were her due. It had been 3 years since the wedding, but Margaret's cold attitude hadn't changed from the very beginning. The reason was Sarah's modest background. The words Margaret had said when the parents met before the wedding still rang in her ears. Our Paul certainly deserves the best, but I suppose these days you can't just judge a person by their family. That single sentence told Sarah exactly what her place was. But she loved Paul and believed that if she worked hard, she would eventually earn their approval. That evening, stretching her aching back, Sarah went to the kitchen. She intended to help with dinner, but she heard quiet voices. Her mother-in-law and sister-in-law, Jessica, were whispering, their heads close together. Mom, please, just a little more. I just need to get through this month. Keep your voice down. What if Sarah hears you? Sarah froze. Her sister-in-law, Jessica, had divorced 3 years ago and had been living with her parents ever since. Sarah often saw her dropping by to discuss things with Margaret, but she never knew the details. Pretending she hadn't heard anything, Sarah turned and went into the living room. Her father-in-law, Stephen, was on the couch, watching TV. He suffered from diabetes and high blood pressure, and citing his poor health, never got involved in household matters. Dad, have you eaten? Yeah, I ate, he answered curtly, his eyes glued to the screen. Sarah didn't press the conversation and left. In this house, she had no allies. Even her husband, Paul, became completely spineless in front of his mother. That night, Sarah finished the translation and emailed the manuscript. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, along with the sense of accomplishment. She whispered to her belly, Julia, Mommy worked hard to earn money for your formula. Though she didn't know the baby's gender yet, Sarah had already chosen a name. She wanted her child to grow up to be honest, and just, like the law. A few days passed. After dinner, Margaret suddenly went into her bedroom. A moment later, a piercing scream echoed through the apartment. "The money's gone." Sarah jumped and looked toward the bedroom. Margaret ran out, her face pale, clutching a bank statement. $300,000 is gone. It was right here. Jessica rushed in. Stephen slowly got to his feet. Paul, who had just gotten home from work, stood frozen in the doorway, his shoes still on. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "What, $300,000? Paul asked hurriedly. Margaret, shaking the bank statement, screamed, "It's the money I was saving for a rainy day." "Who took it?" Sarah stood rooted to the spot, holding her breath. A terrible feeling crept up her spine. Margaret's gaze slowly swept across the living room and landed on Sarah. Her eyes were cold and sharp, as if she had already decided who was guilty. Sarah's heart began to pound. She had done nothing wrong, but under that gaze, she felt like a criminal and instinctively shrank back. Jessica stood beside her mother, her arms crossed. A strange smile flickered at the corners of her mouth. Sarah saw it but tried to convince herself she was imagining things. "Who did this?" Margaret's low murmur filled the now silent living room. A crack had appeared in their peaceful daily life. Sarah didn't know it then, but this crack was the beginning of a storm that would turn her entire world upside down. The baby in her womb kicked again. Sarah unconsciously hugged her belly. She had a life to protect. No matter what. That night, she couldn't sleep. Tossing and turning, Sarah replayed her mother-in-law's cold stare. Could she really suspect me? She tried to push the thought away, but the anxiety wouldn't leave. Morning came. Sarah, pulling her heavy body out of bed, went to the living room. The whole family was already at the table. Margaret, Stephen, Jessica, and her husband, Paul. An unfamiliar tension hung in the air. "Sit down," Margaret said coldly. Sarah carefully sat in the empty chair. The baby stirred, as if sensing its mother's distress. "Sarah, I have to ask you something." Margaret's voice was low and firm. Sarah looked up at her. "Yes, Mom? Did you take that $300,000? Her heart dropped. Sarah couldn't believe her ears. She wanted to believe she had misheard. "Mom, what are you saying? I never even touched that money." "Don't lie." Margaret slammed her hand on the table. Sarah flinched. "Who else in this house knows where the money is? If it wasn't you, then who was it?" In a trembling voice, Sarah replied, "It really wasn't me. I can show you my bank statements. I've only ever lived on the money I earned myself." Jessica chimed in. Crossing her arms and looking at Sarah with contempt, she said, "Sarah, you've been getting a lot of packages lately. What have you been buying?" Sarah looked at Jessica. The packages. They were for the baby. Before the birth, she had been buying diapers, onesies, and other necessities. All of it was purchased with the money from her translations. "Those are things for the baby. I bought them with my own money." "Your own money? And how much do you make, Sarah?" The corners of Jessica's mouth twisted into a sneer. Sarah saw pure malice in her expression. Why was her sister-in-law acting like this? She couldn't understand. Margaret spoke again, her voice even sharper. "You came into our family with nothing. You saw a large sum of money, and your greed got the better of you. That's why you stole it." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. With nothing. That's how her mother-in-law had described her family before the wedding. Her father had raised her alone, and they had lived modestly. It was true, but it wasn't proof that she was a thief. "Mom, it really wasn't me. Please, believe me," Sarah pleaded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Pregnant as she was, she felt an urge to drop to her knees. Her husband, Paul, finally spoke up. "Mom, calm down. Let's figure this out calmly." Sarah couldn't have. Sarah looked at her husband, her eyes begging him to defend her, but Margaret cut him off. "You be quiet. You'll just defend your precious wife." "No, that's not what I..." Paul faltered and looked down. An icy wind blew through Sarah's heart. Her husband was not on her side. He couldn't say a word against his mother. Her father-in-law, Stephen, who had been sitting on the couch, just sighed. "My blood pressure is rising. You all sort this out yourselves." With that, he retreated to his room. Sarah watched him go. No one in this house would protect her. Margaret stood up. Her gaze, fixed on Sarah, was like ice. Fine. If you're going to be stubborn and say it wasn't you, then the police will sort it out. Sarah's eyes widened. Mom, what police? I'm filing a police report tomorrow. For theft. Mom! Sarah cried out desperately. But Margaret, without turning back, went to her room. The door slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. Sarah, Paul, and Jessica were left in the living room. With a trembling hand, Sarah grabbed her husband's arm. Paul, it really wasn't me. Believe me. Paul didn't pull his hand away, but he wouldn't look her in the eye. Let's just hear Mom out first. If it wasn't you, the truth will come out. What does that mean? Are you suspecting me? Paul didn't answer. His silence was more painful than any words. Jessica snorted and left. Sarah, if you're innocent, then prove it with dignity. Why are you shaking like that? Sarah watched her go. Why is she tormenting me like this? She remembered the conversation in the kitchen the day before, Jessica asking her mother for money. Could it be? Sarah shook her head. No, that was impossible. A daughter wouldn't steal from her own mother. Left alone in the living room, Sarah cried for a long time. The baby kicked, as if trying to comfort her. I'm sorry, sweetie. Mommy is having a really hard time right now, she whispered, stroking her belly. She had to protect this child, no matter what. That night, Sarah printed out all her bank and credit card statements. It was the only way she could prove her innocence. But deep down, a dark premonition lingered. What if they actually file a police report? They'll question me while I'm pregnant. I'll have a criminal record. Sarah spent a sleepless night. Outside, a cold December moon hung in the sky. Even its light felt icy to her. The accusation had been made. Sarah didn't yet know that this was only the gateway to hell. Her mother-in-law really did file a police report. The next day, Sarah received a call from the local precinct. They informed her that her mother-in-law, Margaret Thompson, had filed a complaint against her, Sarah Miller, for theft. Holding the phone, Sarah couldn't speak. It was real. Her mother-in-law had reported her as a thief. It had become a reality. On trembling legs, Sarah went to the living room. Margaret was sitting on the couch, a triumphant look on her face. Mom, you really called the police? Of course. You steal and then brazenly deny it. Let the law handle it. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. I really didn't do it. Please believe me. My baby is due soon. And I don't know what you're carrying in that belly of yours. What good can come from a thief? The words took Sarah's breath away. To insult her unborn child, that was inhuman. Just then, her sister-in-law, Jessica, emerged from her room with the same impassive expression as always. Sarah looked at her. Maybe she knows the truth. Maybe she's the real thief. But there was no proof. Jessica, it really wasn't me. You know that, right? Jessica just shrugged. I don't know anything. If it wasn't you, it'll all come out. Her nonchalant attitude sent a chill down Sarah's spine. It was as if she was enjoying the fact that Sarah was the one being suspected. Evening came. Her husband, Paul, returned from work. Sarah practically threw herself at him. Paul, Mom really filed a police report. What am I going to do? Paul's face was a mask of complex emotions, but he didn't hug his wife. Well, it will all get sorted out during the questioning. If you didn't do it, you'll be cleared. Is that all you can say? I'm your wife. Why aren't you on my side? Paul sighed. Mom wouldn't do this without a reason. Let's just wait and see. Sarah looked into her husband's face. They had been married for 3 years. He was about to become the father of her child, and he could suspect her so easily. At that moment, Margaret shot up from the couch. That's enough. I can't have a thief in my house any longer. Sarah's heart stopped. Mom, what are you saying? Margaret walked towards Sarah, her eyes burning like embers. Get out. Get out of this house right now. Mom. Sarah backed away. Margaret's hand tangled in her hair. A sharp pain shot through her scalp. Mom, that hurts. I'm pregnant. Sarah hugged her belly with one hand and tried to pry Margaret's fingers loose with the other, but she wouldn't let go. A thief, eating in our house. It makes me sick to look at you. Margaret dragged Sarah toward the front door. Sarah stumbled behind her. 7 months pregnant, with a heavy body. If she fell, the baby would be in danger. Sarah fought with all her might to stay on her feet. "Paul, help me!" she called out to her husband. Paul was standing in the living room, but he didn't move. He just stood there with a bewildered look on his face. "Mom, calm down." "Shut up!" At his mother's shout, Paul fell silent. Sarah saw it all. Her husband would not save her. He was powerless against his mother. The front door opened. An icy December wind rushed in. Margaret shoved Sarah out into the hallway. Sarah's back hit the wall, and she staggered. "Don't you ever set foot in this house again." Those were Margaret's last words. The heavy steel door slammed shut with a deafening crash. The lock clicked. Sarah was left standing in front of the closed door. In slippers, without a coat. Her phone, wallet, laptop, everything was still in her room. The December night air chilled her to the bone. The single light bulb in the hallway flickered. Sarah slowly slid down the wall and sat on the floor. A sob escaped her. "This is real. They really kicked me out." Her mind was blank. The baby moved in her womb. That faint movement brought Sarah back to her senses. This was no time to cry. If she stayed in the cold for too long, her baby would be in danger. With a trembling hand, Sarah knocked on the door. "Paul, please. I'm so cold. It's dangerous for the baby." Footsteps approached from inside. Someone was at the door. "Paul, open the door, please. I'll talk to Mom when she calms down." It was Paul's voice. The door didn't open. "Open it now. I'll freeze to death." No answer. The footsteps receded. The light in the apartment went out. Sarah stared at the steel door in disbelief. Her husband had abandoned her. He had left his pregnant wife out in the freezing hallway, turned off the lights, and gone to bed. 3 years. Had their entire 3-year marriage ended like this? Sarah collapsed onto the floor. The door to the neighboring apartment opened a crack and then immediately shut. Someone had looked out, but no one came to help. Sarah was completely alone. The cold from the floor seeped into her body. Her fingertips grew numb. Her lips turned blue. The baby kicked again, as if telling her, "Don't give up, Mom. You have to live." Sarah clenched her teeth. She had to protect this child. No matter what. The cold in the hallway was bone-chilling. Sarah sat curled into a ball in front of the steel door. Her bare feet were exposed in her thin slippers, and her lighthouse clothes offered no protection from the December wind. Her fingertips had already lost all feeling. How much time had passed? 10 minutes? 30? She didn't know. Gathering her strength, Sarah stood up again. She pounded on the door with a trembling fist. "Paul, please, open up. I'm really so cold." There was a rustle from inside. Someone came to the door. A flicker of hope ignited in Sarah's chest. "Paul, it's me. Please open up." Paul's voice came from behind the door. "Sarah, Mom's really angry right now. Just wait a little while, I'll try to talk to her." "Not a little while. Open the door now, I'll get frostbite. It's dangerous for the baby." Sarah's voice trembled, whether from cold or despair. It was hard to tell. Just then, Margaret's sharp voice came from the living room. "Paul, don't listen to her. She's a thief." "A thief?" "Mom, but it's freezing out there. Let her find somewhere else to spend the night. She is not coming back into our house." Sarah heard the entire exchange through the door. Her heart shattered. Her mother-in-law's anger was expected, but that her husband didn't even try to fight for her was the most painful blow of all. "Paul, please, just believe me this one time. I really didn't take the money." A sigh came from behind the door. Paul's voice was quieter now. "Sarah, I'm sorry. When Mom calms down, I'll definitely talk to her. Just hang in there for a bit." Hang in there? It was below freezing. She was 7 months pregnant. Sarah hammered on the door. Her palms were numb, but Paul's footsteps were already fading away. "Paul? Paul?" There was no answer. Sarah pressed her forehead against the steel door. The cold metal touched her skin. Tears rolled down her cheeks, freezing almost instantly in the cold. After a while, another voice came from inside. It was her sister-in-law, Jessica. "Sarah, are you still out there?" Sarah lifted her head. A sliver of light was visible under the door. "Jessica, please, open the door. I'm begging you." "Oh, Sarah, you're really something. If you're innocent, go prove it to the police. Why put on such a circus? Jessica's voice dripped with mockery. The sound of it sent shivers down Sarah's spine. This person was enjoying her torment, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. Jessica, maybe? Sarah wanted to say something, but Jessica cut her off. Maybe what? You want to blame me for everything? Don't make me laugh. I'm the daughter in this house, and you, Sarah, are an outsider. The words stabbed her heart like a knife. An outsider. She had lived in this house for 3 years, but she had always been an outsider. No matter how much money she contributed, how much she helped around the house, how much she smiled, nothing had changed. Jessica's footsteps faded away. Silence returned. With one last shred of hope, Sarah called for her father-in-law. Dad? Dad, it's me, Sarah. She waited a long time, but there was no reply. Margaret's muffled voice came from inside. Your father took his blood pressure medicine and is sleeping. Don't wake him. Her father-in-law was sleeping. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just pretending. Just like he always did when there was a conflict, he would retreat with the words, "You all sort it out yourselves." The light in the apartment went out. Even the thin strip of light under the door disappeared. Now, only the flickering hallway light remained. Sarah stared at the steel door in disbelief. She had truly been abandoned. Not her husband, not her father-in-law, no one would open the door for her. Just then, the neighboring apartment door creaked open. Sarah turned her head. The face of a middle-aged woman appeared in the crack. A neighbor from their floor. They had exchanged hellos a few times. Excuse me, please. As soon as Sarah started to speak, the door slammed shut. The lock clicked. Sarah stared at the door, stunned. Her neighbors wouldn't help either. A pregnant woman was shivering in the hallway on a winter night, and no one would intervene. It felt as if the whole world had turned its back on her. Sarah sat on the floor, hugged her knees, and curled into a ball. She gritted her teeth, but the shivering wouldn't stop. She remembered her wedding day. Paul had held her hand and said, "I will protect you for the rest of my life." She had believed him, truly believed him. She remembered the sunrise they watched together on their honeymoon. Paul had held her and said, "We'll have kids and live happily ever after." She had believed that, too. When she found out she was pregnant, Paul had cried with joy. "I'll be a good dad, don't worry." She had believed those words and those tears. And now, that same man had turned off the lights and gone to sleep behind a steel door, lying under a warm blanket while his pregnant wife froze in a cold hallway. 3 years. Had their entire marriage been a lie? Sarah cried silently. It felt like if she screamed, she would only get colder. Tears just streamed down her face. The baby moved in her womb. Sarah wrapped a trembling arm around her belly. She could feel it kicking. That faint movement brought her back to reality. "Julia, I'm so sorry. Mommy is in a bad place right now." She stroked her belly and whispered. She still didn't know the baby's gender, but she already called her Julia. "But Mommy will protect you. I will get through this for you." Sarah clenched her jaw. She couldn't collapse here. She had to protect this child, no matter what. But her body was no longer listening to her. The tips of her fingers and toes had lost all feeling. Her lips were blue. She could feel her consciousness starting to fade. If she stayed here, it would be dangerous. She had to go somewhere, but she had no phone, no wallet. Where could she go on a winter night in only slippers? Leaning against the wall, Sarah slowly stood up. Her legs wouldn't support her. Staggering, she made her way toward the end of the hall. She thought it might be a little warmer in the elevator. One step, another step. Holding onto the wall, Sarah walked. Her belly was heavy. Her legs were giving out. Her vision was blurring. "Just a little further, just a little bit more," Sarah mumbled. The elevator was only 30 feet away, but it felt like an eternity. Just then, a light appeared at the end of the hallway. Someone was approaching with a flashlight. "Who's there?" A low, concerned voice called out. Sarah looked up. Everything was blurry. She couldn't make out the face. "Help!" Sarah breathed out, and her consciousness faded. Her knees buckled, and her body began to fall forward. "My God, she's pregnant!" She heard a frightened cry. Someone's arms caught Sarah. She felt warmth. In that warmth, clinging to the last thread of consciousness, Sarah felt the baby kick again, as if telling her, "Mom, it's not over yet. Hold on." Sarah gritted her teeth. It truly wasn't over yet. It was a hellish night, but even in the darkness, there was a glimmer of light. Someone was holding her arm. Her body, about to collapse, managed to stay upright. Through a blurry haze, Sarah looked at the person holding her. It was a middle-aged man in a security guard's uniform. He held a flashlight in one hand and had a firm grip on Sarah's shoulder with the other. "Miss, wake up. You can't stay here." The guard's voice echoed in her ears. Sarah tried to say something, but she couldn't. Her whole body was frozen. The security guard, Mike Johnson, had worked in this residential complex for 15 years. During his nightly rounds, he noticed a staggering figure in the hallway. At first, he thought it was a drunk, but as he got closer, he saw a young, pregnant woman in thin house clothes and slippers, her face blue from the cold. "Come with me to my office. You'll freeze to death out here." Supporting Sarah, Mike slowly walked with her. Sarah's body was like ice, her lips were purple, and her fingertips were white. They took the elevator down to the first floor. When the door to the security office opened, a wave of warm air hit them. Mike sat Sarah down in a chair and quickly moved an electric heater closer. "1 second, I'll get you a blanket." Mike pulled a blanket from a corner and draped it over Sarah's shoulders. It was old but thick. Sarah wrapped herself in its warmth. Gradually, she began to come to. "Miss, what happened? Why were you in the hallway on a night like this, dressed like that?" Mike asked with concern. Sarah wanted to answer, but her lips were trembling, and the words wouldn't come out. "My in-laws kicked me out," she finally managed to say. Mike's face grew stern. Kicking a pregnant daughter-in-law out into the cold on a winter night, he shook his head in disbelief. "My God, how is that possible? What about your family? Is there anyone you can call?" Sarah nodded. Her father. She had to call her father, but she didn't have her phone. It was still in her in-laws' apartment. "Can I borrow your phone?" Without hesitation, Mike handed her his cell phone. "Here, take your time." With a trembling hand, Sarah took the phone. The numbers on the screen were blurry. Her fingertips were so numb it was hard to press the buttons. She dialed her father's number, a number she knew by heart. It rang once, twice. "Hello?" A deep, steady voice answered. At that moment, tears streamed from Sarah's eyes. Everything she had been holding back burst out at once. "Dad," was all she could manage to say. Sobs choked her, and she couldn't speak. On the other end, her father's voice grew alarmed. "Sarah? Sarah, honey, what happened? What's wrong?" "Dad, Sobbing, Sarah disjointedly explained what had happened. That her mother-in-law had accused her of theft, filed a police report, grabbed her by the hair, and thrown her out. That she was on the street in slippers, with no phone or wallet. That a security guard had found her, and she was now in his office. Her father listened silently until the end, then asked curtly, "Address." Sarah looked at the security guard. Mike dictated the address. Sarah relayed it to her father. "Got it. Don't move from there. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Her father's voice was calm, but there was a steely resolve in it. The call ended. Sarah, clutching the phone to her chest, cried. Mike poured some warm water into a paper cup and handed it to her. "Drink this. You need to warm up." With a shaky hand, Sarah took the cup. The warm water flowed down her throat, slowly thawing her frozen insides. "Thank you, Mr. Johnson." "Thank you so much," Sarah said sincerely. If it weren't for him, she shuddered to think what might have happened. She could have fainted in the hallway, and her baby would have been in danger. "Don't mention it. It's my job." Mike waved it off, but his eyes were filled with worry. "Is the baby okay? Maybe we should get you to a hospital." Sarah stroked her belly. She could feel the baby moving. It was alive. It was holding on. "He's moving. I think it's okay." But deep down, a sense of dread remained. Being in the cold for so long, was everything really all right? What if she went into premature labor? Hugging her belly, Sarah prayed silently. "Please, let everything be okay. Please." Exactly 18 minutes later, the door to the office opened. A man in a black overcoat walked in. John Miller, Sarah's father. At 57, he stood tall and straight, with a sharp gaze, but when he saw his daughter, his expression faltered. And Sarah. Her father took a step forward. Sarah tried to get up from the chair, but her legs gave out and she swayed. Her father rushed over and wrapped his arms around her. "Dad!" Sarah buried her face in her father's chest and sobbed like a small child. His coat had a familiar scent, one she'd known since childhood. Feeling it, all her tension melted away. "It's okay. Dad's here now," he said softly, stroking her back. His words only made her cry harder. She had thought she was abandoned, that she was all alone in the world. But that wasn't true. She had her father, her real family. Holding his daughter, John Miller looked at Mike Johnson. "Thank you for saving my daughter." Mike waved his hand. "Oh, it was nothing, just doing my job." "No, I will be sure to repay you for this kindness." John Miller gave a sincere bow. The head of one of the 5 largest law firms in the country was bowing to a security guard. Mike was flustered, but felt an inexplicable sense of awe. Supporting his daughter, John led her out of the office. A black sedan was waiting for them outside. A driver opened the door. "To the hospital," John said curtly, and the car pulled away. Sitting next to her father, Sarah looked out the window. Her in-laws' apartment complex receded into the distance. She had lived there for 3 years. It hadn't always been happy, but she had believed it was her family. Now, she would never go back. "Sarah, is your stomach okay?" her father asked. Sarah stroked her belly. "The baby's moving. I think it's okay. We need to get you checked out anyway. We're going to a good hospital." The car was headed to a major medical center in the city. When they arrived at the emergency room, the staff quickly put Sarah in a wheelchair. John had apparently called ahead. The examination began. A doctor with a serious expression explained the results. "Signs of hypothermia and uterine contractions have been detected. There's a risk of premature labor. You need to be admitted for at least 2 weeks for observation." Sarah's face went pale. Premature labor. The words echoed in her mind. "The baby? Is the baby okay?" "There's no immediate threat right now, but you need complete bed rest. Absolutely no stress," the doctor said firmly. Stroking her belly, Sarah began to cry. "I'm sorry, Julia. This is Mommy's fault." John took his daughter's hand. "This is not your fault. It's their fault." Sarah looked at her father. His eyes burned with anger, but he was trying to hide it from her. The admission process began. Lying in a private room, Sarah stared at the ceiling. She could feel her body warming up under the clean blankets. She was safe. She was finally safe. The next day, when Sarah woke up, her father was sitting in the room. He must have stayed all night. Her laptop was on the bedside table. "Dad? Where?" "I had it brought from your in-laws' place." "Your things." Sarah looked at the laptop. The translation deadline was in 1 day. Even in the hospital, she had to work. Sarah opened the laptop. "Wait, you're going to work now?" Her father frowned. Sarah nodded. "I have a deadline. It's my responsibility. Your health comes first. Dad, I want to earn my own money and raise this baby without anyone's help." Sarah's gaze was firm. John sighed. He knew his daughter's character better than anyone. Once she made up her mind, she couldn't be swayed. "All right, but don't overdo it." Sarah smiled. It was so good to have her father. The fact that there was at least one person in the world who believed in her was her greatest source of strength right now. The baby moved in her womb. Sarah stroked her belly. "Julia, Mommy will protect you. We'll get through this together." Outside the window, the winter sun was shining. The dark night had passed, and morning had finally come. On the 3rd day of her hospital stay, Sarah, propped up on her bed, was finishing the translation on her laptop. The deadline was the next day, but thankfully, there wasn't much left to do. The doctor had insisted on complete rest, but Sarah couldn't abandon her work. It was her responsibility. The door opened and her father walked in, holding a manila envelope. His face was more serious than usual. "Sarah, we need to talk." Sarah closed her laptop and looked at her father. He sat down in the chair and placed the envelope on the table. What is it? A lawsuit. I'm suing your mother-in-law for assault and defamation. Sarah's eyes widened. She had expected this, but now that it was a reality, her heart felt heavy. Dad, do we have to? Can't we just get a divorce? John shook his head, his gaze unwavering. Sarah, think about what they did to you. They grabbed a pregnant woman by the hair, dragged her out, and threw her into the freezing cold. Not only that, they accused you of theft and filed a false police report. This isn't a family dispute, it's a crime. Sarah bit her lip. Her father was right. What her mother-in-law had done was a crime, but still, she felt uneasy. But they were my family once. Family? The people who threw you into a hallway and locked the door. Is that family? Her father's voice rose. Sarah looked down. Her father sighed and lowered his voice. Sarah, even if I forgive them, the law won't. And this isn't just about you. The baby in your womb is a victim too. For the baby's sake, the guilty must be punished. Sarah stroked her belly. The baby kicked. Her father was right. This wasn't just her fight. Okay, Dad. Do what you think is right. John nodded. He took out his phone and made a call. It's me. The complaint has been filed. I need you to start the investigation and send a request to the Financial Crimes Unit to trace those accounts. We need to find out where that $300,000 went. Listening to her father, Sarah's eyes widened. Financial Crimes Unit? Account tracing? She had no idea her father would go this far. After finishing the call, he looked at Sarah. Sarah, there's something I haven't told you. About my work. You know I'm a lawyer, but I'm not just any lawyer. I'm the head of a law firm. Miller, Sterling, and Croft. Sarah stared at her father, stunned. Miller, Sterling, and Croft. She had heard that name. One of the top 5 law firms in the country. They handled litigation for major corporations, defended politicians, and took on high-profile cases. Dad, you're the head of that firm? Yes. I never told you because I was afraid you'd rely on my power and become weak. I wanted you to become strong on your own. Sarah was speechless. Her father had always been busy when she was growing up. After her mother died, he raised her alone but never stopped working. Sarah had always thought he ran a small, local practice. When her in-laws had belittled her for her family's poverty, her father had said nothing. Why? Why didn't you say anything when they humiliated me like that? I wanted you to prove to yourself that you could live a dignified life without my status. That's real strength. Tears streamed down Sarah's face. Her father had always been like this, watching from a distance, but always the first to come running when she needed him. But things are different now. You are in danger, and I can't stand by and do nothing. John took his daughter's hand. Don't worry. Dad will handle everything. You just need to focus on having a healthy baby. A few days later, a certified letter arrived at the in-laws' home. The sender was the law firm Miller, Sterling, and Croft. The recipient was Margaret Thompson. The letter contained a notice of a pending criminal investigation for assault and defamation, a demand for the return of Sarah's belongings, and a warning of an impending lawsuit for damages. Upon receiving the letter, Margaret turned pale. What? What is this? Jessica, standing beside her, snatched the letter and began to read. As she read, her face turned to stone. Mom, this is a real law firm. Miller, Sterling, and Croft. That's a huge firm. What? They said they were poor. How could they have a firm like that? Margaret, in disbelief, took the letter back. She clearly remembered that Sarah's family was not well off. At the pre-wedding meeting, Sarah's father had worn an ordinary suit, and her dowry had been modest. That's why she had felt so free to look down on them. The head of one of the top 5 law firms in the country. Margaret's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the couch. Mom, what are we going to do? Are they really going to sue us? Jessica's voice trembled. Margaret couldn't answer. Her mind was a complete blank. Just then, the front door opened, and Paul walked in from work. Sensing the tense atmosphere, he asked, Mom, what's wrong? Margaret handed him the letter. Paul began to read. The further he read, the paler his face became. This is from Sarah's parents? Yes. They say her father is the head of Miller, Sterling, and Croft. My father-in-law is the head of one of the biggest law firms in the country. Paul stood there, stunned. In 3 years of marriage, he had met his father-in-law a few times. He had been a quiet, calm man. He had only said he had a small law practice, and it was this massive firm? Why? Why didn't they say anything all this time? Paul muttered. But it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that his mother was being sued. Mom, what are we going to do? Is this really going to court? Come on, we're family. I doubt they'll take it that far. They're probably just trying to scare us, Margaret said, trying to sound calm, but her hands were shaking. Jessica said anxiously, Mom, I'm scared. What if they trace that money? Be quiet! Margaret shot a venomous look at Jessica. Jessica fell silent. Hearing this, Paul sensed something was wrong. It seemed there was something between his sister and his mother, but he had bigger things to worry about now. His father, Stephen, came out of the bedroom. What's going on? What's all the noise? Margaret handed him the letter. After reading it, Stephen sighed. What did I tell you? You shouldn't have thrown a pregnant woman out like that. Is that important now? What are we supposed to do? Don't you yell at me. You're the one who started this. Stephen retreated to his room again. Margaret, unable to contain her anger, clenched her teeth. 2 weeks later, Sarah was discharged from the hospital. She was now 8 months pregnant, and her belly was noticeably rounder. The doctor advised her to avoid stress and get plenty of rest. Sarah moved into her father's home, a spacious, quiet apartment in a prestigious Manhattan neighborhood. Let me know if you need anything, her father said. Sarah nodded. It had been a long time since she had been in her childhood home. After her mother's death 10 years ago, she rarely visited. A photo of her mother hung in the living room. Sarah looked at the picture. Mom, I'm going to be a mother soon. Do you think I can do it? She whispered. Her mother in the photo smiled back warmly. A few days later, she received a call from the district attorney's office. They informed her that the investigation had begun. They were tracing her in-laws' financial records, and they expected results soon. With mixed feelings, Sarah looked out the window. It was snowing. The last day of December was approaching. Julia, everything will be okay in the new year. Mommy promises. Sarah stroked her belly and whispered. It was the calm before the storm, but Sarah knew that soon the truth would come out, and those who had wronged her would get what they deserved. Sarah gritted her teeth. She would not just endure anymore. For her child, she had to be strong. In early March, after a long labor, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby girl weighing 7 pounds, 2 ounces. When the doctor placed the baby on her chest, Sarah couldn't stop the tears. A tiny, red face, clenched fists, soft breathing. Sarah gazed at her daughter's face for a long time. All the pain of the past few months vanished. Julia, it's Mommy. We finally meet, Sarah whispered to her daughter. The baby, as if understanding her mother's voice, made a soft suckling sound. Her father, John, who had been waiting outside, came in. Seeing his granddaughter, his stern face softened. Sarah, you did great. Dad, look, this is our Julia. John carefully peered at his granddaughter's face. A new life had entered the world. He silently squeezed his daughter's hand. On the birth certificate, the baby's name was recorded as Julia Thompson. Since the divorce wasn't finalized, she had to take her father's last name. Looking at the document, Sarah had mixed feelings. She made a silent promise to herself to one day change her daughter's name. A week later, a lawyer sent by her father came to her postpartum recovery room, a young associate from his firm. He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase. Mrs. Miller, the results from the D.A.'s investigation have come in. Sarah, holding her daughter, looked at the lawyer. Her heart beat faster. To put it simply, the $300,000 was taken by your sister-in-law, Jessica Thompson. Sarah held her breath. She had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed made her head spin. This is the result of the financial tracking, the lawyer said, opening the folder. Inside was a detailed report of Jessica's financial transactions. Jessica Thompson, after her divorce 3 years ago, got involved in illegal online casinos. Her total debt reached over $1 million. She had been secretly taking money from her parents to pay it off. And that $300,000 was also withdrawn to cover her gambling debts. Sarah stared at the documents. The numbers swam before her eyes. $1 million, $300,000. To pay off that debt, her sister-in-law had framed her. And there's even more shocking evidence. The lawyer pulled out another document. It was a screenshot of a text message. A message that her mother-in-law, Margaret, had sent to her daughter, Jessica. The date was the evening the money was discovered missing. With a trembling hand, Sarah took the document. It read, "Jessie, don't worry. We'll pin it all on Sarah. She comes from nothing. No one will believe her." Sarah's hand shook. She read it again and again. Each letter was a nail in her heart. Her mother-in-law knew. She knew from the very beginning. She knew her own daughter had taken the money. And yet, she had framed her daughter-in-law, filed a police report, grabbed her by the hair, and thrown her out into the cold. "Is this real?" Sarah's voice trembled. The lawyer nodded. "This is evidence obtained by the D.A.'s office, recovered from a forensic analysis of the phone." Sarah, clutching her daughter, began to cry. From hurt, from anger, she didn't know. Maybe both. 3 years. She had lived in that house for 3 years, contributed money, helped out, smiled. And to her mother-in-law, she was nothing more than a scapegoat to be used at any moment. The lawyer continued gently. "There's something else." Sarah, wiping her tears, looked at him. Something else? How much more did she have to learn? "In preparation for the divorce proceedings, we conducted an investigation into your husband, Paul Thompson. During the investigation, we uncovered evidence of infidelity." Sarah's eyes widened. "Infidelity?" "Yes. We have confirmed that he has been in a relationship with a coworker for over a year. We have collected evidence, hotel records, credit card statements, and messenger chats." Sarah was speechless. An affair. For a year. That meant while she was pregnant, while she was being thrown out, while she was in the hospital with the threat of premature labor, her husband was seeing another woman. The evidence is here. It can be used in the divorce to gain a significant advantage. The lawyer offered another folder. Sarah didn't take it. She didn't need to see any more, and she didn't want to. Her daughter started to fuss in her arms. Sarah, soothing her, looked out the window. The March sun filled the room. Spring was coming. Her entire 3-year marriage had been a lie. Her husband had never loved her. Her mother-in-law had despised her from the start. In that house, she had never once been a real member of the family. Strangely, she had no more tears. The anger was also fading, leaving only an empty feeling. And in that emptiness, a single resolution formed. "Mr. Lawyer, start the divorce proceedings. Make sure I get full custody and child support." The lawyer nodded. "Of course. The evidence is overwhelming. It won't be difficult." Sarah looked down at her daughter. Julia was sleeping peacefully in her arms. This child was not to blame for anything. She had come into this world pure. "Julia, I'm sorry. Mommy didn't know your father was this kind of person." Sarah gently kissed her daughter's forehead. "But it's okay. Mommy will be enough for both of us. We will be happy." The lawyer stood up. "That's all for today. I will contact you when a court date is set. Please get some rest." After the lawyer left, Sarah stared out the window for a long time. Her mother-in-law's text message echoed in her mind. She comes from nothing. No one will believe her. She wanted to prove her wrong. No, she didn't even need to prove it. The truth was already out. The door opened and her father walked in. Seeing him, Sarah burst into tears. She had tried to hold it in, but she couldn't. "Dad?" John walked over and put his arms around his daughter's shoulders. "I heard everything from the lawyer. She knew, Dad. From the very beginning, and she still did that to me." Sarah couldn't finish. John just silently stroked her back. After she had cried it all out, Sarah calmed down. Her father said quietly, "Sarah, what do you want to do now?" Sarah looked at the daughter in her arms and answered slowly, "I want to move forward, for her. I don't want to be stuck in the past." John nodded. "That's right. The law will punish the guilty. You just live your life." Sarah, wiping her tears, managed a small smile. The wound was still fresh. It would probably take a long time to heal. But now, it felt like she could finally move forward. Outside, the spring wind was blowing. Just as spring follows winter, a new season was beginning in Sarah's life. Little Julia opened her eyes. Her clear eyes looked up at her mother. Sarah held her daughter tight. "Julia, we're going to start over. Together, just you and me." One evening in June, Sarah sat in the living room of her father's house, feeding 3-month-old Julia a bottle. The baby had filled out and was healthy. Sarah gently touched her cheek and smiled. Just then, her father walked into the room, holding some documents. "Sarah, we need to talk." Sarah put her daughter in the bassinet and looked at her father. His face was serious. "I got a call from the D.A.'s office. Your mother-in-law and sister-in-law have been indicted. A court date has been set." Sarah nodded. It was to be expected. "And one more thing. The D.A. asked something, whether we would be willing to release this story to the media as a cautionary tale to prevent similar cases." Sarah thought about it. The media. It meant her story would become public. She had nothing to be ashamed of, but it wasn't an easy decision. "It's your choice. If you don't want to, we won't. No one is forcing you." Sarah looked at Julia sleeping in her bassinet. What if, when this little girl grew up, she learned what her mother had been through? If her mother, faced with injustice, had simply stayed silent, what could she possibly tell her child? "I agree." Sarah's voice was firm. "There might be others going through the same thing. If my story can help someone, I have nothing to be ashamed of." John looked at his daughter. A flicker of pride was in his eyes. "All right. As you wish." A few days later, the story broke. On the 9 o'clock evening news, an anchor with a serious face read the report. A Queen's mother-in-law who assaulted her 7 months pregnant daughter-in-law and threw her out into the cold is set to stand trial. The victim has agreed to publicize the case to prevent similar incidents. The screen showed the facade of the in-laws' apartment building. The apartment number was blurred, but anyone who knew them would recognize it. The victim was falsely accused by her mother-in-law of stealing $300,000. However, the investigation revealed that the real culprit was the sister-in-law. It has been established that the mother-in-law was aware of her daughter's crime, but deliberately framed her daughter-in-law. The anchor paused. Meanwhile, it has come to light that the victim's father is the head of the major law firm Miller, Sterling & Croft, a fact that has generated significant public interest. At that moment, in her living room, Margaret Thompson was watching TV. When her building appeared on the screen, the remote fell from her hand. Her heart hammered in her chest. Her whole body felt numb. "What? What is this?" she whispered. But the news report continued, broadcasting what she had done to the entire country. Just then, the doorbell began to ring frantically. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. Margaret jumped and looked at the door. The intercom screen showed the faces of several grim-faced men. "Does Jessica Thompson live here?" "Open up!" A loud banging started on the door, shaking the whole apartment. "Pay up the million you owe. You can't run forever." Margaret's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto the couch. It was the creditors, the people who had come to collect on Jessica's gambling debts. Jessica came out of her room, her face pale. "Mom, what do we do? It's them." "What can I do?" Margaret screamed, but Jessica had no money. She had lost it all. The banging on the door grew louder. Neighbors' doors opened, and people peeked out. Whispers could be heard. "Is that the apartment from the news? My God, they kicked out a pregnant woman. Horrible. And people like that lived right next to us." Hearing these words, Margaret felt the world go dark. From the next day, Margaret's life became a living hell. When she went to the grocery store, people whispered. Some pointed at her openly. Standing in line at the checkout, she heard someone behind her say, "Isn't that the woman from the news?" "Yeah, the mother-in-law who beat her daughter-in-law." Margaret dropped her groceries and ran out of the store, her face burning. All her life, she had cared about her reputation. Being judged by others was worse than death to her. But now, everywhere she went, people pointed fingers. She called an old friend, wanting to vent to someone. "Hello, it's Margaret." "Oh, Margaret, sorry, I'm busy right now. Click. She called another friend. She didn't pick up. Another had blocked her number entirely. These were friends she had known for over 30 years. They had been in clubs together, traveled together, and in an instant, they had all turned their backs on her. Margaret sat on her couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Is this real? How did this happen? Meanwhile, Paul's career was on the verge of collapse. The day after the news report, the atmosphere at work became strange. Colleagues whispered, avoided eye contact. He found himself eating lunch alone more and more often. A week later, his department head called him over. Paul, we need to talk. With a sinking feeling, Paul walked to his boss's desk. His boss's face was grim. We're going to have to take you off the new project. What? Why? I was supposed to lead that. We got a call from the client. They said they would be uncomfortable with you being involved. Paul was speechless. The client had asked for him to be removed. They had obviously seen the news. Sir, I didn't do anything. I know, but our hands are tied. We have to consider the company's position. His boss looked away. Paul stood there, clenching his fists. From then on, he was treated like a ghost at work. He wasn't invited to meetings, was taken off important tasks. No one wanted to sit with him in the cafeteria. A month later, Paul submitted his resignation. We'll process it as a voluntary resignation, so it doesn't tarnish your record, the HR manager said. Paul could only nod. Leaving the office, Paul walked with a heavy heart. He had worked at this company for nearly 10 years. He never thought it would end like this. And then, a greater disaster struck. A foreclosure notice arrived at the in-laws' apartment. With trembling hands, Margaret unfolded the document. It was a notice of foreclosure due to 6 months of missed mortgage payments. What does this mean? What missed payments? Margaret looked at her husband. Stephen, his head bowed, answered, I couldn't make the payments. I was using the money to pay off Jessica's debts. 6 months. Margaret's world went black. Jessica's debts. To pay them off, they had taken out a second mortgage on the apartment. And now, they couldn't even pay that. And the bank was foreclosing. Where are we going to live? We have nothing else. Margaret's voice trembled. Stephen said nothing. They had lived in this apartment for 40 years. They had raised their children here, hosted parties. So many memories were tied to this place, and now it was being taken from them. Margaret collapsed onto the floor and wept. Sarah learned all of this from her lawyer, that her mother-in-law was being shunned by her neighbors, that Paul had been essentially forced out of his job, that her in-laws' apartment was on the verge of being sold at auction. The lawyer asked, So? Do you feel better? Sarah looked out the window. The June sun was shining brightly. Better? No, just empty, she answered honestly. She had thought that seeing her in-laws' downfall would bring her satisfaction, but now that it was a reality, she felt nothing. Even when revenge is served. I don't know if this is revenge. The guilty are just getting what they deserve, but it won't bring back the time I lost. Sarah looked at Julia in her arms. The baby was sleeping, oblivious to everything. I want to move forward. I don't want to be stuck in the past. For her, the lawyer nodded. Sarah gently kissed her sleeping daughter's forehead. Julia, I'm so glad I have you. Because of you, I can look to the future. Outside, a summer breeze was blowing. The past was to be left in the past. Now, there was only the future. It was a hot August day. Sarah stood in front of the courthouse. The sky was clear, but the sun was scorching. Sarah took a deep breath. Today was the day. The trial of her mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Nervous? Her father asked. Standing beside her, Sarah nodded. A little, but I've come this far. I have to see it through. John gently patted his daughter's shoulder. You'll be fine. I'm right here with you. Sarah looked at her father and smiled. It was only because of him that she had made it this far. Entering the courtroom, she saw it was already crowded. Journalists filled the public seating. After the media coverage, interest in the case had surged. Sarah sat in the section for the victim's side and looked across the room. On the defendant's bench sat her mother-in-law, Margaret, and her sister-in-law, Jessica. Both looked haggard. Margaret's hair had turned gray, and deep wrinkles lined her face. The confident woman, who had thrown her out just 8 months ago, was gone. Jessica sat with her head bowed low. The same person who had once sneered, "If you're innocent, prove it with dignity," was now sitting in that very spot. A moment later, the judge entered. Everyone rose. When the judge was seated, the session began. We will now begin the hearing in the case of the defendants, Margaret Thompson and Jessica Thompson. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. Sarah clenched her fists. The prosecutor stood first and read the indictment. The defendant, Margaret Thompson, in December of last year, assaulted her daughter-in-law, Sarah Miller, who was 7 months pregnant at the time, and forcibly ejected her from her home. Furthermore, knowing that her daughter, Jessica Thompson, had misappropriated $300,000, she falsely accused her daughter-in-law of the crime and filed a deliberately false police report. This constitutes assault and defamation. The prosecutor paused. The defendant, Jessica Thompson, misappropriated $300,000 of family funds, which constitutes fraud and theft. A murmur went through the courtroom. The judge gestured for silence. The prosecutor presented the evidence. Your Honor, I present the key video evidence. Security footage from the hallway of the victim's former residence. A large screen in the courtroom came to life. The hallway was visible. The date was December 15th. The time was 9:23 p.m. The apartment door opened, and Margaret came out, dragging a staggering pregnant woman behind her. Her hand was tangled in her hair. Sarah watched the screen. That woman was her. 8 months ago. The one who was stumbling, hugging her belly. It was hard to watch again. On the video, Margaret shoved Sarah into the hallway. Sarah hit the wall and staggered as the heavy door slammed shut. She sank to her knees in front of the closed door. The video ended. Silence filled the courtroom. Sighs could be heard from the gallery. Someone sobbed. The prosecutor presented the next piece of evidence. Next, a text message sent from the defendant, Margaret Thompson, to the defendant, Jessica Thompson, recovered from a forensic analysis of the phone. The text appeared on the screen. "Jessie, don't worry. We'll pin it all on Sarah. She comes from nothing. No one will believe her." The courtroom erupted again. Camera shutters clicked. Sarah looked at the message again. The initial shock was gone, but it still hurt. Her mother-in-law had intended to make her the scapegoat from the very beginning. The judge addressed the defendants. Defendant Margaret Thompson, how do you plead? In a trembling voice, Margaret answered, "Guilty." Defendant Jessica Thompson, how do you plead? Jessica, her head still bowed, also answered, "Guilty." The trial proceeded much faster than expected. The evidence was irrefutable, and the defendants confessed to everything. The prosecutor recommended sentencing. I ask that the defendant Margaret Thompson be sentenced to 2 years in prison, and I ask that the defendant Jessica Thompson be sentenced to 1 year and 6 months. After a short recess, the judge returned to deliver the verdict. Defendants, please rise. Margaret and Jessica shakily stood up. Their faces were ashen. The judge began to speak. Defendant Margaret Thompson, you assaulted your daughter-in-law during her 7th month of pregnancy and threw her out into the freezing cold. As a result, the victim was hospitalized with hypothermia and the threat of premature labor. Furthermore, knowing of the theft committed by your daughter, you falsely accused your daughter-in-law. This is a heinous crime. The judge paused. However, taking into account that the defendant has admitted her guilt and shown remorse, and that this is her first offense, the court sentences the defendant, Margaret Thompson, to 2 years imprisonment, suspended, with a probationary period of 3 years and 300 hours of community service. Margaret's knees buckled. Her lawyer had to support her. The judge turned his gaze to Jessica. Defendant Jessica Thompson, you misappropriated $300,000 of family funds and spent it on gambling. This is a betrayal of your family's trust. The court sentences the defendant, Jessica Thompson, to 1 year and 6 months imprisonment, suspended, with a probationary period of 3 years. The judge picked up his gavel. This concludes the sentencing. The sound of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. Sarah closed her eyes. It was over. It was really over. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, not of anger. They were tears of relief that it was all finished. Her father squeezed her hand tightly. Sarah looked at him and smiled. "It's over, Dad." "Yes, it's over. You did so well." Leaving the courtroom, her eyes met her mother-in-law's. Margaret was looking at Sarah with a ravaged face. Whether her expression was one of hatred or remorse, it was impossible to tell. Sarah silently turned away. She no longer felt anything for that woman. A month later, in September, the divorce was finalized. In family court, they reached a settlement. Paul hardly put up a fight. He had neither the strength nor the grounds. The evidence of his infidelity was irrefutable, and he was essentially an accomplice to his mother's crime. A settlement of $2 million. Full custody of the child to Sarah. Visitation rights once a month. Signing the papers, Sarah felt a strange sense of detachment. 3 years of marriage were ending with a single piece of paper. It felt both empty and liberating. Paul approached her. He had lost a lot of weight. It was clear that life after losing his job was not easy. Sarah looked at Paul. She had once loved this man, had promised to spend her life with him. "I'm sorry," Paul said. Sarah didn't answer. The word sorry couldn't fix anything. "Take care of Julia. I'll handle that myself. You don't need to worry about it." Sarah's voice was calm. Paul seemed to have nothing more to say. He lowered his head, turned, and walked away. Watching him go, Sarah thought, now we are truly strangers. After the divorce, Sarah had one more thing to do. She filed a petition with the court to change her daughter's name from Julia Thompson to Julia Miller. Her child, who had borne her father's name, would now bear her mother's. "The grounds are sufficient. The petition will be granted," her lawyer had said. Sarah had nodded. 2 weeks later, the name change was approved. Sarah received a new birth certificate. It read, Julia Miller, date of birth, March 2024. Mother, Sarah Miller. Sarah stared at the words for a long time. Julia Miller, a daughter with her last name. Now, this child was entirely hers. Returning home, Sarah looked at the sleeping Julia. At 6 months old, the baby was healthy and chubby. Her soft breathing was angelic. "Julia, your name is Julia Miller now." Sarah gently took her daughter's hand. A tiny, soft hand. "Mommy's sorry she couldn't find a better dad for you. But it's okay. Mommy will be enough for both of us." In her sleep, her daughter's fingers tightened around Sarah's. That small grip felt like the greatest strength in the world. Outside, an autumn wind was blowing. The long battle was over. Now, there was only the future. Sarah closed her eyes. Tomorrow, a new life would begin. It was time to stand on her own 2 feet, as Julia Miller's mother and as an independent woman, Sarah Miller. The following spring, Sarah stood in front of a building in a quiet neighborhood. In her arms was 1-year-old Julia, who was looking around with curiosity. On the 2nd floor of the building hung a new sign, the Sunrise Center for Victims of Domestic Abuse. Sarah looked at the sign, her heart full. A year ago, she could never have imagined this. The woman who had shivered in a cold hallway and fainted was now opening a center to help others just like her. Sunrise, it's a good name, her father said, standing beside her. Sarah smiled. They say the dawn is darkest just before the sun rises. I want this place to be a sunrise for people going through their darkest times. John looked at his daughter. The woman who had cried in a hospital bed a year ago now stood so confidently. It was a moment of pride for a father. You'll do great. I believe in you. Thanks, Dad. It's only because of you that I made it this far. The funds to open the center came from various sources. The $2 million divorce settlement was the seed money. To that, Sarah added her own savings from her years as a translator. And her father's law firm, Miller, Sterling, and Croft, had entered into a pro bono partnership, providing free legal aid. She wasn't starting alone, but Sarah knew that accepting help was not a sign of weakness. What mattered was what you did with that help. They went inside. It was a small but clean and neat space. 2 consultation rooms, a waiting area, a small office. The walls were decorated with paintings in warm colors. It turned out even better than I thought, Sarah said, looking around. A friend from college had helped with the renovations. After hearing her story, her friend had called and offered to help. On the office desk were neatly arranged files. A list of partner lawyers, contact information for psychologists, a list of crisis shelters. Sarah checked everything. It was all ready. Julia cooed in her arms. Sarah looked at her daughter and smiled. "Julia, this is Mommy's work. What do you think?" Her daughter smiled in response. For Sarah, it was the greatest encouragement. That afternoon, the first client arrived. Sarah sat in the consultation room, waiting for the door to open. Her heart pounded. Her first consultation. Could she do it? She was nervous. The door opened and a woman walked in. She looked to be in her early 30s. She tried to hide her face with her long hair, but a bruise was visible under her eye. Her eyes were red, and her hands were trembling. Seeing her, Sarah remembered herself a year ago, crying in a hospital bed, a time when she felt completely alone in the world. "Please, come in." "Have a seat," Sarah said as gently as she could. The woman cautiously sat down. Head bowed, she wrung her hands. Sarah didn't rush her. She first offered a cup of warm tea. "You can take your time, we have plenty of it." The woman took the cup with a shaky hand. For a while, they sat in silence. Sarah waited. She knew that in situations like this, patience was key. I don't know where to start," the woman said quietly, her voice breaking. "That's okay. You can just say whatever you feel comfortable saying. No one will pressure you here." The woman looked up. Her eyes were filled with tears. "My husband, he hits me. For 3 years now." The word squeezed Sarah's heart. 3 years. How scared she must have been all this time, how lonely. "I haven't told anyone. I was ashamed, embarrassed. I thought maybe it was my fault somehow." Tears streamed down the woman's face. Sarah handed her a tissue. "You are not to blame." "This is not your fault," Sarah said firmly. The woman looked at her. "Really?" "Yes, really. No one deserves to be abused. You are not to blame for any of this." The woman's lips trembled, and a sob she had been holding back finally broke free. Sarah waited quietly until she had calmed down. After a while, the woman, wiping her tears, asked, "And you, the director of this center, why did you decide to do this?" Sarah paused, then answered honestly, "I've been through it myself." The woman's eyes widened. "Yes, a year ago. While pregnant, I was assaulted and thrown out by my mother-in-law, on a winter night, in just my slippers." Sarah spoke calmly. The memories were still painful, but she could talk about them now. "Back then, I thought it was the end of the world, that no one would help me. But that wasn't true. There were people who helped me. Because of them, I was able to get to where I am today." The woman looked at Sarah. Her expression changed. In her eyes, which had been full of despair, a flicker of light appeared. "That's why I wanted to help. To help others like me. I wanted to let them know that they are not alone." Sarah gently took the woman's hand. "You can do this too. We will help you here. Legal advice, psychological support, connections to shelters, we can provide it all. You don't have to fight this alone." Tears welled up in the woman's eyes again, but this time, they were different tears. Not tears of despair, but tears of hope. "Thank you. Thank you so much." The woman bowed her head. Sarah gently patted her shoulder. "Take it one step at a time. We'll do this together." After the consultation, Sarah sat in her office, looking out the window. The spring sun was shining. The wind carried cherry blossom petals. Julia cooed beside her. Sarah picked her up. 1-year-old Julia was noticeably heavier, but that weight was a source of happiness for Sarah. "Julia, Mommy had her first consultation today. I was nervous, but I think it went well." Her daughter, as if understanding, smiled and touched her mother's cheek with her tiny hand. Sarah held her little hand. A small, soft hand. This little hand was what had helped Sarah get back on her feet. It was only because of this child that she had been able to endure. "Thank you, Julia. Because of you, Mommy made it this far." The door opened, and her father walked in, holding a potted plant. A small yellow flower was blooming in the pot, a gift for the opening. I thought it would brighten up the office. Sarah took the pot. The yellow flower shone in the sunlight. It's beautiful, thank you, Dad. John looked at his daughter and granddaughter. A flicker of emotion was in his eyes. If your mother were alive, she would be so happy to see what a wonderful woman you've become. Sarah nodded. Her mother, who had died 10 years ago. She missed her. She wished she could show her mother Julia, show her this center. Mom is probably watching from somewhere. She definitely is. Outside, the spring wind blew. Cherry blossom petals drifted past the window, as if her mother were sending her greetings. Sarah, holding Julia, walked to the window. People were walking on the street below, living their lives. Among them, there were surely some who were struggling, who felt alone. Sarah wanted to reach out to those people, to pay forward the help she had received. That was why she had created this center. Julia, we are going to live our lives to the fullest, a life worthy of being your mother. Her daughter gurgled in response. Sarah smiled. The wounds of the past hadn't completely healed. They would probably remain as scars for the rest of her life. But now, those scars were not a source of shame. Because of those scars, she could understand others who shared her pain. Today was a day she was living not as someone's daughter or someone's wife, but as an independent Sarah Miller, as Julia Miller's mother, and as the director of the Sunrise Center. She was beginning a new day. Outside the window, the spring sun was shining. The long winter had passed, and spring had finally arrived.